Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast, and welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
Post your tales of spooky adventures in the desert. Screw the woods. I live in a semi-rural community in the Sonoran Desert, Arizona. So basically there are houses around mine and we are surrounded by desert wilderness and mountains. So here's the story. Windy but clear night in the desert. No streetlights, but it's a full moon and there's plenty of porch lights. Clear visibility. Sitting on my roof where there's a deck and chairs looking across the desert. Power lines are buzzing abnormally loud and make this bizarre tether noise. Reminded me of Twin Peaks. Light up a cigarette. No other drugs in me. Hear a trash can tip over down the street. Look that direction and see this shadowy shape. About as tall as an F-250, darting from shadow to shadow. I'm spooked, but it's not close enough to be sure it's real. See it dart into my neighbor's backyard. Their horses go crazy and make a load of noise, but my neighbors don't seem to be home. Can't see the thing because it's mostly dark in their yard. Suddenly see it dart behind our shop in our yard. It was as tall as our truck and 100% humanoid as it moved towards the shop. Very spooked now, and my dog is losing his mind inside the house. Sit there a long time frozen. Finally go downstairs and get on with my night. Still windy. About go to bed. Suddenly hear footsteps run across my roof like I was in signs. Hear my mom say,
"Oh my God, I think an animal just jumped off our roof."
Spook.jpg. Still fell asleep and never saw it again.
Apparently I didn't save a proper screenshot, but this is a semi-local, kind of spooky story I must have got from X or TG sometime in the past. The Haunted Warrens is a legendary series of underground passages allegedly dug by the inhabitants of an American ghost town whose name is now lost to time. With a history of gold mining rushes, the state of Montana in the northern region of the United States is populated by a wide and impressive variety of ghost towns. The Haunted Warrens were thought to be a part of one located somewhere between Lake Sealy and Lake Inez, north of modern Missoula in that state. A number of nearby creeks were thought to have been targeted for panning prospectors sometime between 1858 and 1870, while the majority of gold prospecting was conducted further south near Anaconda. Several prospectors with a rudimentary knowledge of topography were said to have headed north, believing the source of the gold was there and that it somehow flowed downhill. The Warrens were subsequently dug in this time period. Deceased local historian Loretta Pline attempted to pinpoint the location between 1960 and 1963 but could only guess at a number of potential sites. She did, however, hint at the existence of albumen prints of the site from sometime in the 1890s, though this is now thought to be discredited. Regardless, Pline remains the source of much of the authoritative material on the subject, owing to her other credible work detailing Native American folklore and art. The Warrens, so it is claimed, were dug over a period of several years. A crude and at times gruesome imitation of shaft mining. The caverns were scarcely large enough for a man to crawl through, fashioned as if by a prisoner tunneling out of a prison but in no discernible path or fashion. Snaking around in giant circles nearly a half-mile long in some cases. Hired boys, some say, later were brought from miles around and forced at gunpoint to dig in this way for days at a time before dying from thirst and exhaustion. A new boy would then be brought to continue the previous man's work. The labyrinths created resembled rabbit warrens, from which the structures draw their name. All told, they were said to be close to a square mile of visible surface trails and an unknowable amount of tunnels beneath. Some untold number of dead lies interred within. Pline's version of this history is very likely embellished, though the foundations of the story may be true. A contemporary observational report filed by an anonymous writer for a private courier reports men drunk with gold fever digging holes in the ground like dogs looking for a bone. This less dramatic vision does not disqualify the possibility of men digging tunnels in the ground, perhaps losing their sanity out of desperation. A concentration of lead in the groundwater is a possibility other researchers have explored, as well as an outbreak of syphilis common in frontier towns at the time. Regardless, the Warrens are largely believed lost at this point. A summer storm overflowed Lake Sealy in 1969 and again in 1988. Water runoff due to topographical changes caused by other prospecting ventures is also likely to have obliterated the site.
Be me. 18 right after high school. Decide to take a cross-country trip before I start uni. Good times. Mostly camp. Need work every now and then. End up broke in New Mexico looking for work. Find work replacing roofs on Navajo Reservation. Gov project. The rest of the crew stays in a school overnight. I decide to camp out in the desert. First night, wake up to sounds of someone walking around my tent. Freaks me right out. Wake in the morning and find a pot I used to cook with missing. Find a yellow flower in its place. Next night, footsteps again. Another flower but nothing missing. Third night, footsteps. I decide to investigate. Get out of the tent and hear the footsteps scurry off. This is getting weird. Start yelling into the desert. What do you want? Next night, I decide to sleep in my truck so I can look at my campsite during the night. Stay up all night. Around 3 a.m. I see her. A native girl about my age. She looks around my site and puts a flower on my cooking table. Get out of the truck, she runs off. Next night, she shows up again, but I left a flower for her. She picks it up and sits down by my campfire. I come out from the shadows and she starts to get up, but I calm her. I sit across from her. We were miles away from anything deep in the desert. I start asking questions. Are you out here alone? What are you doing out here? No answer. She stands up and gives me the follow me hand gesture. I do. I follow her. We walk for about a mile. I was camped at the bottom of a mesa. The breeze blowing down it at night was comfy. We wound our way through the corridors of mesas and down into a canyon. In the canyon there was water and vegetation. She knelt down beside the stream and picked a flower and handed it to me. She said in broken English, "Hold this, it will keep you safe." Then she kissed me. Safe from what? She let go of my hand and walked towards the canyon wall. And then she was gone. 1 second there, the next second not. I had an urge to follow where she went to see what happened to her. But another urge that told me not to, just turn around. I got lost out there that night. I tried to go back the way we came, but nothing looked familiar. I walked all night and half of the next day. Just before dusk I ran into 4 Navajo men who were looking for me. They told me I hadn't shown up for work for that day, and everyone on my crew just thought I had moved on. Until one of the people at the house we were working on overheard him saying that I had told him about my nightly visitor and the flowers. The Navajo whose house we were working on was an elder and ordered a search party immediately. They told me she was a descendant of the people who lived there before them, that they had left this world thousands of years ago and moved into another, that very rarely a portal opens up where people can cross over. Legend goes that they send young pretty girls to lure men into crossing over to be used as slaves. Their telltale is a flower. If I would have followed her, I would have crossed over, and who knows when or if the portal would have opened up or if I would have even be able to find it. They said that if I didn't go on my own, the girl slipped me drugs in the kiss to make me confused and lost, and that night if they hadn't found me, the other side was going to take me by force. They called her a poison woman.
B kid. Riding home from something at night on highway through Arizona. Tons of shrubs, brush, and cacti on the flat desert floor with mountains obscuring the horizon. Look out window. See a strange orb of greenish-yellow light that's pretty far away but still as low to the ground as a car would be. It's moving in the same direction and speed as our car. Not one bit of inconsistent speed or positioning for something that would have been driving over bushes, uneven ground, dead logs, and avoiding cacti. No dust trail like you'd expect of a car going highway speeds through dirt. Whole family sees it and we're freaking out. Try to pull out cheap digital camera. As soon as the camera was pointed out the window, the light slowly dims until it's gone. I still can't think of an explanation for this using only modern technology of the time. Any land vehicle would have been unable to maintain such a perfect progression through the desert, let alone not cause a sizable dust trail behind it.
Be me teenager hiking in a desert with friends. Unusual trail, hiked it many times, it's average desert stuff. After a while, once we are out of sight of the road, come upon a gully I have never seen before. I've been through this area before but not seen it. Pretty weird too, had people-sized niches in the walls. Almost like a burial area. Decide to investigate. One friend nopes out and stays behind. Me and remaining friends start walking down. As soon as we do, I get the feeling that we really shouldn't, as if we had walked into someone's yard and they casually pointed to the no trespassing sign with their shotgun. Tell my friend I think we should leave. Friend ignores me and continues to snoop around, even poking into the weird niches. Finally manage to drag her back out of the gully as the feeling that we not welcome intensifies. Yet a distinct "this place is not for you" 2 legs in my head. Return home without incident. Friend that's too nosy for her own good takes off and wuss friend stays the night. Within an hour we are both miserable and sick. Super intense migraines. Sound hurts, light hurts. In the dark with blankets over the windows, it's still painfully bright feeling. Suffer through the night and wake up with flu-like symptoms, nausea, fever, cough, shakes, the works. We are sick for a week. Write an apology and leave it with some water out in the hills. Get better but can no longer find the gully with the weird niches. That was 10 years ago. I still can't find Thar Gully, though I have hiked the same path many times. I do sometimes feel a watchful presence and get the feeling of being regarded as two legs when I'm out there, though.
Got a couple. Both happened out at Rio Verde. Those from Phoenix should know. Keep in mind these happened a long time ago, before they renovated the place, paved some paths and opened it up for all the snowbirds and transplants. My buddies and I were out across the river and a couple miles out and were drinking around the campfire and just bullshitting. Around 1 or 2 we decide to head into town, so go to put the fire out. Now what we usually do when we put a fire out is afterwards just sit in silence for about 10 to 15 minutes in the woods, just listening to the silence and sitting in the darkness. Cool to creep yourself out or look at the stars. So we put the fire out and are just sitting in silence. Finally my buddy speaks up and says it's about time to go, so we all get up. Suddenly my friend turns the lantern on and starts going fuck what the fuck. I turn around just in time to see a white, hairless creature about waist height take off into the darkness. What was real unsettling to me was how it moved, kind of galloping/hopping, but with weird joints. Where its knees should have been, they were bent the opposite, like the joints in the legs operated completely differently. Freaked us all the fuck out and we quickly jumped in our buddy's truck and got the fuck out of there. Could have been just a diseased rabbit or coyote, but we all felt real unsettled just by looking at it. One more story I have from the same night. It happened just before this event when we first got to the site and also creeped us out. At around 10-ish we had crossed the river and hiked out to the site we liked to chill at. This site was unique in that it was a sort of crossroads for 2 different paths that headed out towards the hills in the east. We had set up and decided it would be cool to head down the trail we hadn't explored yet that followed the river. This was in the spring, so there was tall, maybe knee-high grass around the path, which was covered by the branches of the low-hanging trees that tend to grow around riverbeds. Anyways, we are about 5 minutes down the path when suddenly a man stumbles up and over the riverbank and stops in front of us, about 20 meters out. Every single one of us paused and are sort of surprised to see another person out here, as we didn't see any cars parked along the trail and hadn't heard any music or talking in the distance. This man is still standing there, staring down the path towards us, when suddenly 2 more people stumble out from where he came from and come to a stop next to him. The 3 of them are now all staring down the path at us. The creepy thing is that they were not talking to each other or even acknowledging each other, just staring down the path. I hissed a "what the fuck" to my friends, who all whispered that this felt really wrong. The 3 in front of us starting walking down the path towards us, still without speaking or communicating to each other in any way. Then, as soon as they started walking towards us, more people started coming over the bank behind them and wordlessly started walking down the path towards us. Including myself, there were 5 of us, and at this point it looked like there was close to 25 of them. My buddy suddenly said, "Fuck this," and started walking straight at the group, silently approaching us, and we instinctively followed behind. My flight or fight instincts had kicked, filling me with adrenaline. When we finally met on the path, I saw that the people in the group were not looking at us, but rather through us. Still completely silent and without acknowledging our presence or breaking their gaze down the path, this group of what I could now see were all men in their early 20s moved around us and continued back down the path towards the entrance to the area. Still pumped full of adrenaline and feeling uneasy, my buddies and I all stopped and watched the last of them turn the corner and disappear out of sight. The weirdest thing we realized was that not only were they not talking to each other, but also that they made no noise when they walked. For a group that large, you would expect to hear them break the grass along the path or hear the snapping of sticks on the path, but they didn't. Also, we wondered how the hell all those people got out here without leaving their cars parked somewhere that we would have noticed. Best we could guess was that they were some weird church group doing rituals or some nonsense out here. Either way, the entire situation was really unsettling and made us decide to bring our handguns next time we headed out there.
I live in Sydney, Australia, and I'm 25 now. I've got a few experiences with this particular stretch of bushland, but one experience stands out to be the most perturbing. I was around 18 or so when I first stepped into this national park type bushwalking forest with a few friends. We just started to smoke weed and we were always looking to find a good spot. My friend Josh always told me about this place. He would say there is this rock somewhere down in the bush that has a huge pentagram carved into it, and that the tree exactly opposite it was used by some poor bastard to hang themselves. At first I thought he was talking shit, so I never went there, but when he finally took me I found it to be true. This forest wasn't exactly special or anything, just a lot of bush walking trails everywhere stretching from a few kilometers to like 50 km, so it was a pretty largish area of woodlands. Every time I stepped foot in this forest, which was on and off again, I would feel like something wasn't right. Like I was disturbing something or like something didn't want me there. Anyways, my story starts when I was about 21 or around then. I was with my mate Josh again, and we decided to go on a solo smoke with each other during the early evening around 9 p.m. We were driving around getting settled in some parking lot and then getting spooked and having to change locations. We decided after a while to say screw it and roll a bunch of blunts and hit up that satanic forest where people had self-ended themselves. Josh was always saying how that forest was kinda messed up, that this particular bush had a bunch of weird circumstances and stories surrounding it. He mentioned cultists would go to this rock with the pentagram and have ritual summonings or some shit. I've always been the kind of person to ignore bullshit when I hear it, so I figure screw it. Why not? So we head down and go down to the rock. We chill out and relax talking about superstition and all different types of stories surrounding this place. Bigfoot, ghosts, demons, and hobo aboriginals. Laughing, having a good time, and basically getting high. It started getting late, maybe like midnight, when we were out of blunts, and in the meantime we had found 2 large walking sticks which we had proceeded to sharpen while talking on the rock. I wasn't feeling anything strange, but around the time we were finishing up I started to feel this weird presence, like I was being watched. I was just sitting there quietly when Josh asked me if I could feel it too. Turns out the hairs on the back of his neck were standing up too. The moon was full, so the forest was pretty lit up and we could see pretty well since we were sitting in the dark for hours and our eyes had adjusted. I nodded to him, yeah, I can feel it too. Feels like we're being watched. He agreed and we thought about it aloud for a while. After sitting there for about 10 minutes, we decided to man up and start bushwalking through this area to see if we could experience something. We always loved Bigfoot stories and unexplained shit that lived in the woods, so we figure screw it. We've got our sticks. We're both pretty fit. I figure if an angry aboriginal comes out at us, we've got a pretty good chance. It was about that time that I noticed the pentagram we were sitting on was covered in wax. And it seemed pretty fresh to me. That weirded me out, but I thought nothing of it. In hindsight, I wonder if it had anything to do with what happened that night, as if something might have been summoned recently. I digress. The way the paths and trails on this bush were set up made it almost impossible to get lost, and we started down the bush. It was a thick path, maybe 2 meters across, enough for both of us to walk comfortably down the trail deeper into the woods. Anyways, the path was lined with bushes and trees, making it pretty hard to see past a few meters, and even with the full moon out. Nothing interesting happened as we entered the deeper part of the woods, but we were keeping quiet anyway because we were trying to hear if anything was around us. About 30 minutes into this particular trail we stopped and my mate produced another joint. At first I was pissed that he was holding out on me, but then I was happy that he saved it. We began to smoke it and talk quietly about how creepy this place feels, about how the deeper we went and the more uneasy we felt. Josh is about 6.5 feet tall, I'm about 5'7" tall. Both pretty stocky and bulky, so we could hit the bong for hours and not get too blazed. As we were standing there face to face muttering to each other about how we felt out of place, something smacked me in the back of the head. Hard. Now I've felt this feeling before and I know what it was. The thud, the quiet ear ringing, and the sharp pain. My friend yelped a little at my sudden outburst of pain and told me he watched a rock fly out of the darkness and smack me in the back of the head. At this point I was pissed off and I turned to face the direction it came from with stick in hand and kinda growled and said loudly, "Damn it," while rubbing the back of my head. I didn't think about it just then, but why was a rock flying out of the darkness at us? I looked over at Josh and he looked spooked.
What was that?
It flew out of the bushes and sconed you in the head.
What the hell, man?
Where did it come from?
Someone threw it.
That spooked us both out after we came to the realization that something was out there. Being the brave dumbasses we were, we picked up a rock each and pelted it into the direction we thought it was coming from. Up until this point we had been hearing the normal bush noises you'd expect. Owls hooting, birds chirping, crickets and cicadas making noises, but after this it was dead silent. Not a single cicada. If you've ever been to Australia, you'd know that in the summer the cicadas can be deafening. But now it was silent. This spooked us even more. So we both pelted rocks into the darkness from where we thought the noise came from and heard them hit trees with a distinctive thud. As soon as they hit the trees, we heard something moving fast through the bush with very loud crunching noises. The floor of the trail we were walking on was covered with leaves and sticks and shit, and I've heard and seen swamp wallabies in the bush before. I've seen kangaroos before. Whatever was in the bush was much bigger and much heavier than either me or Josh. We were kinda noping at this point until we heard the thing stop somewhere in the distance. We couldn't hear any more noise, so we figured it must have been an animal. Though we kept in mind it didn't sound like anything we had heard before. Even now, I don't think I could make such loud thumping, crunching noises even if I tried. Josh is a trained boxer, medals and shit. Whenever I was with Josh, I felt pretty untouchable. He was a pretty big dude, tough as nails, and knew how to intimidate people. So I relaxed a bit, but he didn't. I got a bit more excited, which kinda excited him. We kinda messed around, punching each other, laughing a bit about how creepy that was and how we should probably head back. But something in us compelled us to continue. As we were heading deeper into the bush, we kept hearing those crunching noises. The more we heard it, the more it sounded like something bipedal was following us through the bush. And that it must have had some weight to it too, because it was louder than us. We kept scanning around, but whatever it was just out of sight. So as we were continuing down the trail, the crunching kept getting closer, closer, almost as if it was within the few meters we could see in the dark. Each time it got close, we'd stop and try to spot it. We decided earlier on we weren't going to use our torches because it was a full moon and we could see further than the torches would show. Phone lights don't reach very far. Anyways, each time we stopped and approached the bush, we could hear something weird, some sort of breathing noise. Maybe it was the wind, but it sounded completely different to the wind. After a few more steps down the trail, we heard it move, but this time it was close. Closer than it had been before. It was weird. Every time we moved, it moved. When we stopped, it stopped. This kinda got us on edge, and we readied our sharp walking sticks and approached the bush slowly. The bush had gotten thicker and the visibility had lowered slightly, but in the bush no more than 5 or 6 meters away, we could see something swaying between some trees. We could barely see what it was, but it became pretty obvious that it wasn't a tree when it would sway just left of the tree like it was poking its head out and then dart back behind it. Josh and I were beginning to nope pretty hard by this point. What is it?
I dunno, man, but it's bigger than the two of us.
Get ready to Spartan kick anything that comes out of that bush, and I'll spear it. As we were watching it, we noticed it was approximately 7 feet tall, with a shoulder span of maybe me and Josh combined. It looked to have a dense fur about it by the outline of its silhouette. Me and Josh were standing there for a minute or two when Josh picked up a stone and pegged it hard at whatever it was. It must have hit the tree it was hiding behind, because the noise it made was pretty close by. The moment the rock hit the tree, we heard what I can only describe as a startled moan. We noped hard then, but kept our position. It sounded almost humanoid, but whatever it was didn't like that. Not one bit. After a few seconds, we started hearing a huffing and puffing, almost like a bull snorting. This scared the ever-living shit out of Josh and I. Now, I'm not going to say we were trembling or anything, but it was about as close to shitting ourselves as we had ever been. Whatever it was stepped out from between the trees and took a step towards us. We took a step back. At this point, we could see it a little better, and whatever it was definitely taller than us. Wide and definitely bipedal. I was ready to nope out of there, so was Josh. A second later, it stepped forwards again, but this time we stood our ground. We readied our spears for the charge, but what we saw made us pretty weak at the knees. I was holding my spear tightly and pointed it at whatever it was, but as it stepped forwards, we could see its eyes. My freaking Christ, even now it runs shivers down my spine. The eyes were huge. Not too big for its head, but they were glowing red. I'm talking about bright red, like laser pointer red. It was clear by now that whatever it was mad, because the huffing and puffing was louder and louder. And now it was grunting. At that point I thought it was a gorilla by the noises it was making, but there was no way this thing was a gorilla. Besides, we're in the bushland in Australia. How did a gorilla get here? We started to retreat a bit from this, slowly moving back away from the edge of the path to the other line of trees behind us, when we heard a loud crashing noise coming from behind us, like something had dropped out of the trees. We spun around and we could see another set of red eyes staring into us, and at that point Josh grabbed me by the shoulder, shoved me back up the trail and screamed, "Run!" And we did. We legged it up the bush trail, dropping both our spears. As we were legging it up the trail, whatever they were was following us faster than we could run. At first it sounded like only 2 things were crashing through the woods behind us. Then 3, then 4, then I don't know how many. Whatever they were chasing us down. As professional bong rats, I didn't think we could run for much longer, but funny how adrenaline can make you extend past your limits. We were sprinting as fast as we could up the path until we got to the point where the trail became really steep. We knew we were close to the rock we started on and thus close to our parked car, but this steep incline slowed us down considerably to the point that we were at a slow power walk up the trail. Behind us I could hear bushes being mowed down, sticks snapping, branches cracking, and god-awful huffing and puffing and grunting and moaning. I literally thought we were going to be eaten alive that night. We got to the top of the incline and we had to take a breather. Standing back to back, each one of us facing one side of the bush, we stood there trying to get our breath back as quickly as possible. Fear only allowed us to stop for about 30 seconds before we had to leg it again because rocks and sticks and branches started flying out of the darkness at us. We were at our wits' end at that point, so we started running as best as we could back to the rock. When we got to the rock, we stopped and had to take a much longer breather, but we had either outrun whatever it was or they had stopped chasing us. We were standing in the middle of the pentagram, hanging over our knees, almost throwing up how fast we were running, trying to ask each other,
What was that?
"I've never seen or heard anything like that before. Holy shit, I thought we were going to die."
Those eyes, man, I'm never going to sleep again.
How many were there? 4, maybe 5.
Had to be 4 at least. Christ.
We noped hard out of there soon after that. As we were leaving, getting back to the cars, we heard what I can only describe as a loud moaning growl, similar to what we heard before. Then a group of hoots and groans coming from a distance. I have never been more scared in my life. In Australia, the Aborigines have told stories about something called a yowie. Many people disregard them as folklore and bullshit superstition. But me and Josh reckon that's exactly what we saw that night. We went back there a few times, but we never encountered anything like that one night.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel, as more green texts will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check out the Odyssey page in the description for a second archive of the channel's videos.